found my mother's house listed for sale online while she was still living in it. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone without thinking, when a photo made me stop. The front porch, red shutters, the swing on the left that always creaked if you pushed too hard. The address sat under it in bold numbers. It was the same house number I had written on envelopes since I was a child. I tapped the listing. I swiped to the living room. Then I saw it, on the coffee table, slightly off-center, a white mug. My mug. I had left it there last week when I came by after work. The small chip on the handle was clear. My stomach tightened. The price was listed under the photos. It was low for this neighborhood, low for the work we had done over the years. Beneath it, move-in ready. Next to that, a green dot reading new, posted that day. I swiped through the kitchen. The captions repeated the same 3 words: bright, airy, updated. The dining room came next. I scrolled to the description. Realtor language. Lovingly maintained. Perfect for first-time buyers. Quick possession possible. My thumb hovered over the contact button. The thought of strangers walking through the hallway where my school pictures used to hang made my skin prickle. A map was pinned below. The school, the park, the highway. Property history showed nothing for years. Then, listed today. No mention of my mother. No mention of me. Just the house, reduced to bullet points. I checked other real estate sites. Same photos, same price, same description. On one site, the mug had been cropped out, but I could still see the edge of it in the blur. I clicked to see how many people had saved the listing. The number was already climbing. I went back to the living room photo. The mug stood out like a mistake. Proof the pictures were recent. Proof they were taken after my last visit. I took screenshots, as if the evidence might vanish. The backyard photo was from the corner near the lilac bush. The grass was cut short. The garden cleared of my mother's tomato cages. The bird bath was gone. In its place, a small metal bistro table that had never been there before. The fence looked freshly stained. Someone had prepared the property for showings. I stared at the agent's number. I didn't press it. I scrolled to the bottom and saw a line I hadn't noticed. Open house this weekend. I read it again. If this was a mistake, why invite strangers inside? And if it wasn't, who gave them permission? I always believed my mother and I had a solid relationship. After my father passed away, we got even closer. I helped her pay off the remaining mortgage, sometimes covering her utility bills when she fell short. It was never something I thought twice about. She was my mother. That was all that mattered. After the funeral, we met with the notary to settle my father's affairs. The house was put in both our names, equal shares. I barely registered it at the time. It didn't feel like ownership. It felt like continuity. It was the home I grew up in, the place where I could still walk in without knocking. It wasn't my half. It was ours. We lived in the same city, only a short drive apart. Sundays were our tradition. I would bring dessert. She would make dinner. Sometimes pie, sometimes roast chicken. We talked about work, neighbors, the weather. We never had to dig into deep topics. The comfort was in the routine. Because of that, I never questioned her when she said we needed to sign some paperwork at the family lawyer's office. She told me it was just to streamline the title documents, make things easier for the future. Her tone was casual, almost rushed, like she was ticking something off her list before moving on to dinner plans. We sat in the lawyer's office on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. The place smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. A stack of documents was placed in front of us. I didn't read them. I signed where the sticky tabs pointed. I remember making a comment about how many signatures they needed for something so simple. She laughed lightly and said, "That's just how they do it." The lawyer didn't explain much, and I didn't ask. I assumed it was routine maintenance for the title, something to make things official, since my father's name was no longer on it. My mother slid her signed pages to the edge of the desk and checked her phone while I finished mine. We left the office and went straight to dinner, like nothing important had happened. She didn't bring it up again, and neither did I. If anything, I was relieved to have it done. Another task off the endless list that came after losing a parent. Looking back, there was nothing in her behavior to suggest anything unusual. She called me the next day about a sale on baking supplies. We planned the Sunday menu. I dropped off some extra coffee beans I had picked up for her. It was all normal, completely normal. We even talked about repainting the kitchen in the spring. She wanted a pale yellow, said it would brighten the mornings. I offered to help. She joked that I could be her free labor. There was no rush in her voice, no mention of change. Sometimes she would mention bills in passing, how the gas company had overcharged her, or how the property tax had gone up again. I always told her not to worry. I could help, and I did more than once. She always said thank you, but never hinted that she needed more. The Sunday before I saw the listing, I spent the afternoon at her house. We baked an apple pie together. She was in good spirits, telling me about a new neighbor who had moved in down the block. We sat in the living room afterward. That's when I left the mug on the coffee table. She teased me about forgetting things, and I promised I'd pick it up next time. There was absolutely nothing that hinted at what I would discover days later. No signs of packing, no realtor cards lying around, no comments about wanting to move. That's why the listing hit so hard. Because in my mind, we were in sync. We shared the house in spirit, even if we lived separately. She'd never given me a reason to believe otherwise. Now remembering that afternoon at the lawyer's office, I could replay the sound of my pen on paper. How quickly I moved from page to page. How I never once stopped to read what I was signing. And how she never once told me to. That moment, so ordinary at the time, set in my mind like a still image. My signature sliding across a blank I hadn't read. Her eyes on her phone, waiting for me to finish. It had felt like nothing then. But now, I couldn't stop thinking about it. If she had asked me for anything else that day, I would have given it to her without question. And that, I realize now, was exactly the problem. When I saw the listing, my first thought was that it had to be a mistake, a wrong address, a mix-up by some realtor who had pulled the wrong set of photos. That had to be it. I grabbed my keys without even thinking about changing clothes and drove straight to my mother's house. It was a short drive, but my mind didn't stop racing the whole way. Every traffic light felt too long. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked exactly as it always did. Her car was in its spot. The porch swing moved slightly in the breeze. The curtains in the living room were drawn halfway, the way she liked them. There was no for sale sign in the yard. She opened the door before I knocked. She was wearing her usual apron, the one with flour stains on the front. The smell of cinnamon came from the kitchen. It was Sunday all over again. I didn't waste time. I held up my phone and showed her the photo from the listing. "This is online," I said. She looked at it for a second, then gave a small smile. "Oh, that's nothing. The realtor must have posted it by accident. We were just checking the market. Just checking the market. She said it like it was the most harmless thing in the world. As she talked, I glanced past her into the hallway. That's when I noticed them. 3 large cardboard boxes stacked against the wall. They were sealed with packing tape, each with a white label, written in thick black marker: kitchen, bathroom, living room. I tried not to stare at them, but they were impossible to ignore. She didn't mention them, and I didn't ask, not yet. She moved back toward the kitchen, telling me there were cookies in the oven. I followed her, still holding my phone, still staring at the photo on the screen. The kitchen counters were mostly clear, except for a plate of measuring spoons and a single mixing bowl in the sink. On the table sat a small stack of envelopes, all unopened. The top one had the logo of a real estate company. I couldn't see the whole name from where I stood, but it wasn't the one she had used when she sold my grandparents' house years ago. I asked her why a realtor would need to check the market by making a full listing. She said it was just to see what kind of interest the property might get, and that nothing was decided. Her voice stayed light, but her eyes flicked toward the oven timmer, as if she was waiting for it to save her from the conversation. When the timer went off, she pulled out the cookies and set them on the counter. The smell should have been comforting, but I couldn't shake the image of those boxes in the hall. She offered me one, and I took it without thinking. It was still warm, the chocolate chips soft. I ate half, set it down, and asked her if she had been talking to anyone about selling. She said no, just looking. Everyone looks, she said. Doesn't mean they're moving. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to tell myself the boxes were just her way of sorting through things, maybe clearing out old junk. But the labels, room by room, were too organized to be random. I glanced at the sink again. No dirty mugs, no crumbs on the counter, no clutter. It was the cleanest I'd ever seen her kitchen outside of a holiday. I stayed another 20 minutes, making small talk about my work and a new restaurant downtown. She listened, nodded, asked the right questions. She was exactly the same as she'd always been, except for those boxes in the hallway. When I finally left, she hugged me at the door and told me to drive safe. I walked to my car, glancing once more at the porch, at the way the cushions on the swing matched the ones in the listing photos. On the drive home, the image of those boxes kept flashing in my mind, labeled, sealed, ready. If this was just checking the market, why did it look like she was already halfway gone? That night, I could not stop thinking about the boxes. I kept replaying her words, just checking the market, and trying to make them fit what I had seen. They did not. Around midnight, I got out of bed and opened my laptop. I typed the address into the county's online property database. It was a system I had used once before, when I was helping a friend with a title search. When the page loaded, I saw the most recent filing at the top. It was dated a little over a month ago. I clicked it, expecting some routine update. Instead, I saw a scanned document with my name on it. My full name typed neatly in the grantor section. My mother's name in the grantee section. The title, Quitclaim Deed. I froze. The document stated that I had voluntarily relinquished all interest in the property. My share, half of the house, was now hers alone. I read it twice before my eyes landed on the signature line. It was mine. The same slanted loops. The same way I always crossed my T. The same signature I had put on those technical documents at the lawyer's office. I sat back in my chair, feeling the pieces shift into place. Those pages had not been harmless title adjustments. I had signed away my legal claim to the house without even reading what I was signing. The notary's seal was on the bottom right corner. The lawyer's name matched the one we had met that day. There was no sign of hesitation in the file, no gap in the timeline. Everything was neat and final. I scrolled down to the processing notes. The transfer had been recorded 2 days after we signed. A week later, a lien release appeared on the file, clearing the remaining mortgage. That meant the house was now fully in her name, debt-free. The listing I had seen online wasn't just testing the market. It was real. She could sell without my consent. She did not even need to tell me. I clicked through the earlier records, looking for anything that might explain why. The only changes before this were standard property tax updates and the refinancing after my father died. There was nothing unusual until the day I signed those papers. I took screenshots of every page, date stamps, my signature, the file numbers. I saved them in a folder on my desktop labeled House. Then I went back to the real estate listing and read it again, this time with the knowledge that the property was no longer legally mine. The staged furniture, the stripped walls, the price. It all looked different now. Final. I could almost see the sold sign in the yard. I thought about calling her right then, but it was after 1 a.m. If she was asleep, she would let it go to voicemail. If she was awake, she might hear something in my voice. Instead, I sat in the dark, staring at the scanned image of my signature. I remembered the pen in my hand that day, the way she had chatted about dinner plans, how quickly we had left afterward. The memory felt different now. Every detail was heavier. Her checking her phone. The lawyer's brief nod when we were done. The pages turned so I would see only the signature lines, not the text above them. I closed the laptop, but the image stayed with me. My name under words I had never read. My share of the house, gone with a stroke of a pen. I thought about all the Sunday dinners, the quiet afternoons fixing little things around the house, the way she'd call me first when something broke. None of those moments hinted that she was already planning for a future that didn't have me in it. And that made the signatures on that page feel like something far colder than ink. By morning, the shock had settled into something colder. I made coffee and stared at my phone, half expecting a message from her about something ordinary, a store sale, a neighbor's gossip. Nothing came. I opened the listing again. The open house this weekend note was still there. The same photos, the same price. My mug was still on the coffee table in the living room shot, like a quiet reminder of the last time I had been there without knowing the truth. I didn't delete the screenshots. I backed them up to an external drive. If she could take my name off the deed without telling me, I needed to hold on to proof of what had happened. I closed the folder and sat at my desk, the cursor blinking on an empty screen. I was no longer guessing. I knew. She had already taken my half of the house, and she had done it in a way that made it look like I had handed it over willingly. I decided not to confront her right away. If I told her what I knew, she would have a chance to hide the rest. I needed to understand exactly what she was doing before she realized I was paying attention. That morning, I called the lawyer's office. I told the receptionist I wanted a copy of all the documents I had signed there in the last 6 months. She asked for my name, put me on hold, and came back saying, "Those were already filed. You have your copy." I told her I didn't, that I needed another set. She hesitated, then said she'd email them. An hour later, they arrived in my inbox. The quitclaim deed was there, along with a stack of other forms I didn't recognize. Things about title clearance and property transfer tax. All of them had my signature. Every single one was dated that same day. I printed them and laid them out on the table, reading each line. The language was legal and dense, but the meaning was clear. I had signed over my rights entirely. She had made herself the only owner. There was no mistake, no clerical error. I spent the next hour digging through public listings again, but this time I checked the under contract section. Her address wasn't there yet, which meant she hadn't accepted an offer. But the open house was still scheduled, and the post was drawing a lot of saves. I decided to see what I could learn from the real estate side. I called the number on the listing, disguising my voice as best I could. The agent answered brightly. I told her I was interested in the property and asked if it was still available. She said yes, that it was a wonderful opportunity, and that the sellers were motivated to move quickly. Sellers, plural. I asked who was on the title. She said she couldn't give me that information over the phone, but that both owners would be at the open house. Both owners. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a few minutes. Then I called my bank to double-check the loan I'd taken for the bakery renovation. It was tied to the house as collateral. The banker confirmed the lien release I had seen online. "It's clear now," he said. "Paid off in full." I asked who had paid it. He said the system didn't show the source, only that it was satisfied. By mid-afternoon, I knew I had to speak to someone in person. I drove to the lawyer's office without calling ahead. The receptionist recognized me immediately. When I asked if she could tell me who had purchased the house or who it was being sold to, she started to say she couldn't, then stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes flicked to her screen, and she said, "Oh, I thought you knew. It's already under a pending agreement." I asked for the buyer's name. She shifted in her chair. "I'm not supposed to," she started, then sighed and lowered her voice. "It's a Gary Miller. I thought you knew him." The name meant nothing to me. I asked if he was a realtor. She shook her head. "No, I think he's your mom's husband." The word landed like a stone. I asked her to repeat it. She nodded. "At least that's what it says on the paperwork. Spouse." I left without another word. Outside, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at the steering wheel. My mother had never mentioned remarrying. She had never even hinted she was seeing someone seriously. And now, a man I had never met, apparently her husband, was the one buying our family home. The picture started forming, piece by piece. She took my name off the title, cleared the mortgage, lined up a buyer who, according to the papers, was tied to her personality. If I confronted her now, she could say it was a misunderstanding, claim I was overreacting. So I drove home and decided I would keep watching quietly. Let her think I was still in the dark. The more she believed that, the more she might reveal. That night, I backed up every file again. I printed extra copies and locked them in my desk. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me think about trucks pulling up to the house, furniture being carried out, strangers walking through what used to be ours. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a message from her saying it was done, that I didn't need to come by anymore. But there was nothing, just silence. If she wanted me to stay out of this, she was about to find out I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't wait long. The next morning, I drove to my mother's house with a folder on the passenger seat. Inside were the printouts from the county site, the deed with my signature, and the email from the lawyer's office. I told myself I would keep my voice even. I wanted answers, not a scene. She opened the door before I knocked. She said she was about to make coffee and asked if I wanted some. I said yes and followed her into the kitchen. The apron was on, the same one as always. The counters were almost empty. The 3 labeled boxes in the hall had multiplied. There were more now, smaller ones stacked on a chair, each with a neat white label. I told her I had been on the county site the night before. I said I had seen the quitclaim deed with my name on it. I told her I knew I no longer had any legal share. She did not look surprised. She said it was only paperwork, that it made things simpler for everyone. She said that when Dad passed, the title got messy, and this was the cleanest way to put it right. She said we had signed it together, and she wasn't hiding anything because there was nothing to hide. I slid the printout across the table. My signature, the date, the notary stamp. She glanced at it and nodded like I had shown her a grocery receipt. She said the lawyer had handled everything and that she trusted him. She said I had signed because I trusted her. She used the word trust twice, like that settled it. I asked her who Gary Miller was. I said the receptionist at the lawyer's office had mentioned a buyer and had used the word spouse. I kept my tone steady. She took a breath and said Gary was her husband. She said they had married quietly a few months ago. She said it had been sudden but right. She added that she had meant to tell me when the time was right. I asked her why the time had never been right. She said it was complicated. She said she didn't want to burden me while I was working on the bakery renovation. She said Gary was private and did not like attention. She kept saying it kindly, like she was protecting me from something small, not something that changed our entire life. I asked her if the plan was to sell the house to Gary. She said they had considered options. She said it did not matter who wrote the check as long as the sale closed. When I asked why Gary, her own husband, would be the buyer, she said it was just paperwork, a way to secure the property in his name, alone before they moved to Florida, for tax purposes, and to avoid any claims from third parties. She said the important thing was that she and Gary were moving to Florida. She did not build up to it. She dropped it like it was a line in a schedule. Florida. I asked when. She said soon. She said the open house would go ahead this weekend and that the interest had been strong. She said the price was fair and they wanted to move quickly. She added that she had always hated winters and that Florida would be good for her joints. She said Gary had friends there and that they could start fresh near the coast. I looked at her, and everything hit me at once. The shelves that used to hold the family photos now bare, the empty hooks by the door, the neatly stacked boxes already labeled and ready to be loaded. This wasn't just testing the market. This was the final stage of something she had been moving toward for a while. She just hadn't let me see it. I told her my bakery loan had been tied to the house. I said the lien release showed it was paid, but that the collateral was still listed in the original documents. I asked if she had thought about what a sale would do to my business, if anything slipped in the closing. She said the bank was satisfied. She said the debt was cleared. She said Gary had told her it would not affect me. I asked how Gary knew anything about my loan. She said he was good with numbers and had looked over the paperwork. She said he had helped her organize her bills this year. She said he was practical. She looked at the boxes when she said it, like they were proof. I told her I had helped with those bills for years. I reminded her I had paid off the last of the mortgage after the funeral. I said I had covered taxes when they jumped and utilities when they piled up. She nodded. She said she knew. She said she was grateful. She said none of that changed the reality that she had earned the right to decide where she lived. I said deciding where to live was not the same as using my signature to erase my share without telling me. I kept my voice low. She said I had not been erased. She said I had agreed. She said my signature was on the page. She said if I had wanted to keep 50%, I should have read what I signed. She said it softly, like she was giving advice to a stranger. She set a folded piece of paper on the table. It was the schedule for the open house, with the agent's name, time slots, and a note about removing personal items. Most of the lines were checked off: pantry cleared, bedroom staged, family photos stored. She tapped the paper and said it would be better if I did not come by during the showing. I asked if Gary would be there. She said yes, briefly. She said he would arrive near the end to sign what the agent needed. She said she hoped we could meet before then, but did not promise it. She said he was busy with travel plans. She said he had already shipped a few boxes to Florida. I looked at the boxes in the hall again. I asked if she had planned any of this before the day at the lawyer's office. She said they had talked about Florida for years, even when Dad was alive. She said the quitclaim made it easier to move quickly, and that moving quickly was best for everyone. She used the phrase "for everyone" like it included me. I told her I felt blindsided. I told her the house was not just her address. She said she knew what the house meant. She said change was hard. She said she was not asking me to like it. She said she was asking me to accept it. Then she said I was strong and would manage on my own. She said I had always been independent and resourceful. I said the bakery was in that house by paper, whether the lien was cleared or not. I said every plan I had made assumed stability there. I asked what would happen if a buyer changed a term, if the bank asked for something new, if the closing slipped. She lifted one shoulder. She said it would work out. She said I always found a way. The coffee went cold between us. She stood and rinsed her cup. She asked if I wanted more. I said no. I told her I would send her a copy of the documents I had printed. She said that was not necessary. She said the lawyer had everything. She said we should keep things simple. On my way to the door, I stopped at the boxes. The labels had expanded to include office, linens, garage. The writing was steady, like it had been done over days, not hours. I asked when she had packed them. She said she had been sorting for weeks. She said it felt good to clear space. At the door, she hugged me like she always did. She told me to drive safe. She said we would talk soon. She didn't say when. I said I would be in touch before the weekend. She said I didn't need to worry about the open house. She said the agent had it handled. I stepped onto the porch and turned back once more. I told her I would expect transparency about every step from here on out, because the bakery depended on it. She looked at me steadily and said she understood. Then she added, almost gently, that she believed in me. And when I asked what that was supposed to mean, she said, "You always find a way." 3 days after I sat in her kitchen, listening to her talk about moving to Florida, the letter came. A white envelope with the property management company's logo. I opened it at my desk in the bakery's back office, expecting maybe an update about repairs or taxes. It was a formal notice of termination of lease. The reason box was checked. Change of ownership. The last line gave me 60 days to vacate the premises. I called the management office immediately. The woman on the phone was polite, But when I told her there must be a mistake, she said, "The property is already in escrow. The new owner doesn't wish to continue the lease." I told her I was the co-owner of that property. She didn't hesitate. "According to our records, you're not." She repeated that the title listed one owner, my mother. I hung up and stared at the letter for a long time. The bakery wasn't just my income. It was my staff's jobs, years of work, my savings poured into renovations. The bakery occupied the ground floor of the same building as my mother's house. She lived upstairs for decades. The property itself had been the collateral for my renovation loan, which meant that if ownership changed, my lease and my business would be at risk. Without the building, I'd be forced to shut down, maybe for good. That afternoon, I met with an attorney a friend had recommended. His office was small, with stacks of files on every surface. I handed him every document I had collected: the quitclaim deed, the copies from the lawyer's office, the escrow notice, the screenshots of the listing. He read in silence, flipping pages slowly. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. I had grounds to sue for fraud and misrepresentation, possibly forgery if I could prove I hadn't understood what I was signing. He warned it would be a long fight. I asked about the bakery. He said we could file for an injunction to stop the sale until the ownership issue was settled. But he also said I should prepare for the possibility that the court wouldn't grant it in time. We filed the complaint the next morning. My mother was formally served through her attorney that afternoon. A preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. During those 2 weeks, I worked at the bakery every day, like nothing had changed. But every time I looked at the walls or the ovens, I wondered if I'd still be here in a few months. The night before the hearing, I didn't sleep. I went over every possible scenario, what she might say, whether she'd even show up, what Gary's role in all of it really was. On the morning of the hearing, I got to the courthouse early. The day before the hearing, I caught myself walking through the bakery, mentally saying goodbye to every detail. The stain on the wall we never painted over. The tiny chip in the tile near the register. I was trying to memorize them the way you memorize faces before a long separation. Not because I wanted to, but because I was afraid they'd be gone without me knowing. My attorney met me in the hallway. We didn't make small talk. He just reviewed his notes and reminded me to keep my answers short if I was called to speak. When the side door opened, my mother walked in with Gary. She looked polished, in a navy blazer I'd never seen before. Gary was tall, broad, clean-shaven this time. He didn't glance in my direction. They sat together at the opposite table. The judge called the case. My attorney went first. He laid out the timeline. My father's death, the joint ownership, the quitclaim deed I signed without being told its true purpose, the current sale in escrow. He submitted each piece of evidence into the record. My mother's attorney stood and countered that I had signed everything willingly, that there was no coercion or deception, and that my mother had acted within her legal rights as sole owner. He claimed my opposition was personal resentment over her marriage to Gary, not a legitimate legal dispute. The judge listened without interruption, then asked if the parties had discussed settlement. Both attorneys said no. The judge ordered us to mediation before trial and scheduled the next hearing. As we left, my mother walked toward me. Gary stayed back, talking quietly with her attorney. She said, "We're family. This doesn't have to be like this." I told her I didn't start this. She said it was just a house, that I shouldn't ruin our relationship over a piece of paper. I told her, "You already did." She stared at me for a long second, then turned and walked back to Gary. They left without another word. That night, I closed the bakery and sat in the dark office, long after the last employee left. The termination letter was still on my desk, beside the stack of court papers. The hearing was over, but the real fight hadn't even started. The temporary restraining order bought me time, but it didn't make me feel safe. I knew my mother and Gary would be looking for a way around it. Court was weeks away, and they had every incentive to keep moving in the background. The first thing I did was go back through the property records. I wanted to make sure nothing had been filed since the TRO. No new deeds, no liens, no rental agreements. The file looked the same as when I'd last checked, but I didn't trust that it would stay that way. Next, I drove by the house. From the street, nothing looked different. The porch swing was still in place, the curtains still half drawn. But the open house sign that had been leaning against the inside wall of the porch was gone. In its place was a plain black doormat I had never seen before. I parked 2 houses down and sat there for nearly an hour. No one came or went. After about 20 minutes of waiting, I noticed the light flick on in the upstairs bedroom, then go dark again a few seconds later. The curtains shifted slightly, like someone had been standing behind them, watching the street. I couldn't tell if it was her or him, but the feeling that I was being seen was too strong to dismiss as coincidence. When I finally started the car, I saw a silver SUV turn into the driveway. It was Gary's. He got out carrying 2 grocery bags, unlocked the front door, and went inside like he lived there. That night, I asked my attorney if the TRO prevented my mother from letting someone move in before the sale. He said technically it only stopped the transfer of title. She could still give someone access if she wanted to. He explained that the TRO didn't stop her from showing the house, changing the furniture, or even negotiating a sale. It only blocked the actual transfer of ownership until the court ruled otherwise. My stomach tightened. Gary could be settling in right now, and there was nothing I could do about it until court. 2 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The man on the line said he was with the county assessor's office, confirming the square footage of the house for an updated record. When I asked why it was being updated now, he said it was part of a change of occupancy review. I told him the property wasn't changing hands. He sounded confused, said his file showed pending reassignment. I wrote down his name, the date, and exactly what he'd said. Then I called my attorney again. He told me to keep every note, every phone record, and to avoid confronting my mother directly until we were in front of the judge. The following weekend, I drove past the house again. This time, the driveway was full. Gary's SUV, my mother's sedan, and another car I didn't recognize. Through the front window, I saw 3 people moving around the living room. The furniture was different. The coffee table, the one that had held my mug in the listing photos, was gone. I stayed parked until the unfamiliar car left. A man I didn't know got into it. He was carrying a folder. Back home, I checked the listing online. It had been updated. The open house no tice was gone, replaced with private showings by appointment only. The price was the same, but a new line had been added. Property available with or without current furnishings. That told me 2 things. They were still actively trying to sell, and the furniture was now negotiable, which meant they were packing, which meant the TRO was just a hurdle, not a wall. I sat there staring at the screen, my hand still on the mouse. The words felt like they were moving the walls in around me, closing in one detail at a time. If they were willing to strip the house piece by piece, They wouldn't stop until there was nothing left that tied me to it. Monday morning, my attorney filed a motion to clarify and expand the TRO to cover any occupancy changes, removal of fixtures, or transfer of possession before trial. Until the judge ruled, I had to assume they'd keep pushing. The next day, I got a text from my mother. "We need to talk before court. Dinner?" I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. Just an invitation, like nothing had happened. I didn't respond right away. I called my attorney, read him the text, and asked if meeting her could hurt my case. He said as long as I didn't agree to anything or sign anything, it couldn't. But he warned that it might be exactly what she was hoping for. That night, I wrote back, "Dinner's fine. Thursday." I didn't tell her I'd be recording every word. I got to her house 10 minutes early. Gary's SUV wasn't in the driveway, only her sedan. The porch light was on, even though it wasn't dark yet. She opened the door like it was any other Thursday. Same apron, same faint smell of something baking. But there were fewer things on the walls. The photos from the hallway were gone. The hooks by the door were empty. I sat at the kitchen table. She poured wine without asking if I wanted any. The bottle was already half gone. "I don't want this to get ugly," she started. "It's already ugly," I said. She sighed, sat down, and folded her hands. "You're making this harder than it has to be. The house is mine. I'm selling it. You can fight me in court, but in the end, nothing changes. Why not take the money now and be done with it?" "What money?" I asked. She named the same low figure from mediation. I didn't answer. She kept talking. Said the buyer was ready to close as soon as the TRO was lifted. Said Gary was helping her move her things to a storage unit. Said this was a fresh start. "You didn't even tell me you got married," I said. "That's my personal life," she shot back. "You don't have to approve." "You used my signature to take my half of this house," I said. "That's not personal. That's fraud." Her jaw tightened. "You signed willingly." "Without knowing what I was signing," I said. "That's not my fault," she said. The conversation went in circles. Every time I brought up the documents, she redirected to the future. Her new life, Gary, moving somewhere warmer. Every time I pressed, she said I was stuck in the past. When she got up to check the oven, I glanced toward the counter. A manila folder lay half open. Inside were printed emails. I could see a header, "Purchase Agreement." The buyer's name was still Gary. The closing date was 3 weeks away. She came back with a tray of rolls. I didn't touch them. She talked about the move like it was no bigger than changing wallpaper. No mention that we hadn't had a real conversation in months. No acknowledgement that I'd learned everything from documents instead of from her. And in every sentence was that calm, almost patronizing, "You'll get over it." I listened and realized that in her mind, this chapter was already over. She was just waiting for me to stop fighting it. I asked her if she really thought she could keep the sale moving under the TRO. She didn't answer directly, just said, "Things have a way of working out if you don't fight them." I stayed another 20 minutes, letting her talk. She didn't admit to anything outright, but she confirmed enough. That the furniture was being sold separately, that she had a storage unit under Gary's name, that the utilities were already scheduled for shut-off at the end of the month. When I left, she hugged me at the door like nothing had happened. In the car, I wrote down everything she'd said, word for word, while it was fresh. Then I drove straight to my attorney's office and handed him the notes. He read them, looked up at me, and said, "This is exactly what we needed." The next week in court, Her attorney argued that I was dragging out the process to hurt her personally. Mine presented the property records, the signed deed, the TRO violations, and my notes from dinner. He asked the judge for an injunction, preventing any sale, transfer, or change in occupancy until the fraud claim was resolved. Her attorney objected. The judge overruled. The injunction was granted. The case moved forward. Discovery turned up emails between her and Gary, discussing getting my name off the title quietly and avoiding a buyout. There were also drafts of the quitclaim deed sent to her by the lawyer, weeks before she ever mentioned streamlining anything to me. Faced with that, her attorney requested settlement talks. This time, the number was the full market value of my share. I took it. It wasn't the house, but it was justice in the only form the law could give me. The sale to Gary never went through. Public records showed the listing was withdrawn a month later. I didn't follow what she did after that. I didn't want to know. I kept the folder marked house in my desk. Inside are the screenshots, the property filings, my notes. And on top, the real estate photo of the living room with my mug on the table. The last time that house was still ours. What would you do in my place? Please write your thoughts in the comments. I will be happy to read them